Welcome everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's flute session and storytelling. I'll be your guide today through this journey. My English name is Michael Charette, and I come from northern Wisconsin. There's a small group of islands there located in Lake Superior called the Apostle Islands, and that's where I come from, the territory of the Anishinaabe people. We also go by Ojibwe, and we're most well known as the Chippewa. Yes, and actually that flag up there in the middle, it has the stripes of the yellow, black, white, and red. That would be my reservation's colors. Considered the Ojibwe Nation, yes. We're considered like the third largest indigenous population. The first largest, I believe, and anyone can correct me if this is wrong, but they say that the Navajo or the Dene are the first, or the Cherokee are the first, and then the Navajo, and then the Chippewa. So we have a very, very large group, a very, very large territory that I come from. I always tell people that if you look at a map of the Great Lake chain systems, and if you drew a circle around that system, all of them, that would be the territory of the Algonquin-speaking people. That would be considered the Ojibwe territory. So as I go along and I share stories and culture, I also share that history so that we can kind of like get educated a little bit about the indigenous people. And I want to put us in that mindset of the way things were a long time ago. Because here we are gathered much like that of our ancestors. We come together in this circle to honor each other's spirit and to share that culture, that knowledge, and that history with one another. You know, a long time ago, when the indigenous peoples would meet each other, one of the first things that we would do when we meet each other is that we would sit down and we would pull out the pawagan, the pipe. And we would sit down with each other and we would smoke the pipe with the idea that we had one breath and one prayer going up to the spirits to be heard. And then after that, we would trade. We would trade culture, stories. We would trade goods to help ensure each other's mutual survival. So that false narrative that you've always heard about Indians being savages and always being at war with each other, that just isn't true. One might even say that we were in the business of meeting other cultures. And there's many ways that we can share these cultures, and it's through the stories, it's through the dance, and it's through our music. And one of the stories that I want to start off with today is a story of love unconditional. And it's the creation story of the Native American courting flute. And we, Anishinaabe and Indigenous in general, we have creation stories for everything out there. We have creation stories on why the raccoon wears a mask. We have creation stories on how Turtle Island, North America, was made. And we even have creation stories on why the Unimush, why the dog, why they smell each other's butts. Yes, we even have stories like that. But this story today I'm going to share with you happens like most stories happen a long time ago in a village far, far away. There was this young man in this village, and this young man, he was good at everything. He was good at hunting, he was good at fishing, he was a good provider. But one thing he wasn't good at is he was not good at expressing his feelings. And one day, the young man, he came back to his village from a successful hunt, and the village, they would celebrate his success. And this young man, he would look across the fire and he would see this beautiful young woman standing there, his heart's desire. And he thought to himself, this is it. This is when I go up to her and I tell her how I feel about her. So he would work up his courage and he would walk up to her and he would open his mouth, but no words would come out. Embarrassed by this, he would retreat to the outskirts of the village, and he would watch as other young men of the same age would go and talk to her and try to get her attention and her affection. And this frustrated the young man, but he remembered in his stories, in his teachings from his elders, that there was an Ayabe out there. This Ayabe is said to be a huge albino buck that lives to the west, and it's said that this Ayabe carries the love medicine with him. And this young hunter thought to himself, if I can somehow hunt this Ayabe, I can somehow get that love medicine, and then I can present it to her, and then she will know how I feel about her. So the young man, he would pack up a bunch of provisions, and he would go out into the woods, and he would find the biggest set of tracks that he could find out in the woods. And he thought to himself, this is it. This has got to be the Ayabe. So he started to follow those tracks, and they led him deeper and deeper into the woods, further and further away from his village. He would see a flash of white out of the corner of his eye. The ayabe. He pulled back his bow and arrow, but it would be gone. He'd follow those tracks again, and they'd lead him still deeper and deeper into the woods, further and further away from his village. And he would see again that flash of white out of the corner of his eye. The ayabe. He pulled back his bow and arrow, but it would be gone. Finally, the young man was exhausted from his travels, and he made a fire underneath the cedar tree. And as he sat there looking at the fire, listening to the crackle and pop, the image of his heart's desire came to his mind. And somewhere, way off into the night, he heard a sound. And that sound would put him to sleep. The next day, the young man would wake up to a knocking. And as he would open his eyes, he would look up into that tree, and he would see that there was a beneshi in that tree. And that beneshi was standing on a branch. That bird was standing on a branch, and it was knocking holes into that branch. And when the bird flew away, the wind picked up, and it made that same noise that he had heard in his dreams. The young man knew that that's what he was looking for, that that's what the ayabe had led him to. So he stood up and he reached up into that tree and he grabbed the hold of the branch and he broke it off. And as he was sitting there studying that branch, he was trying to figure out how to make that sound come from that branch. So he began to blow on it like this. Nothing. He blew on it like this. Still nothing. He was even going like this, trying to get that wind to pass through those holes. Still no sound. Out of answers, he sat there and he looked at the fire. And he remembered again his teachings from his elders, that whenever you seek knowledge, you have to offer something. So the young man would reach into his pouch and he would pull out some asema, some tobacco, sacred to the indigenous peoples. We use it to commune with the spirits, to talk to the Creator. The young man would say a prayer to the spirit of that bird that made that unique, beautiful sound. And he would offer his tobacco to the fire, which would turn it into smoke, bringing his prayers up to be heard by the spirits. While the young man was sitting there waiting for an answer, he would fall asleep. And in his dream, the bird would come and visit him. And it would ask him, "What is it that you are seeking?" And the young man would tell the bird of his dilemma, tell him about his heart's desire and his inability to communicate his feelings. Tell him about how the ayabe had led him to that spot in the woods where he heard that unique, beautiful sound. Tell him about the other young men in the village and his frustrations. And the spirit bird would listen to this for a while, and then finally he would take pity on the young man, and he would begin to tell him how to create the first bibiguan, the Ojibwe word for flute. He would tell him how long to make the flute. He would tell him where to put the holes in the flute. And he would say, whenever you blow into the bibiguan, you carry the image of your heart's desire in your mind, and you feel it in your heart. And when you blow into the bibiguan, it'll wabiguan out of the other end. Wabiguan, the Ojibwe word for flower. Your feelings, they will flower out of the other end, and people will know how you feel. Upon waking from this vision, the young man starts to get to work on constructing the very first flute. And as he was almost done, he carved out a bird to place on top of the flute out of love, respect, and honor for the one that had taught him how to make that unique, beautiful sound. The young man, he was many, many days away from his village, so he made a long journey back home. And he would stop and take a break every now and then, and each time he did that, a beneshi would fly down, and it would land by him, and it would sing to him, and it would encourage him to grab his flute and do the same. Finally, the young man, he would make his way back to his home, and as he stood on a hill, he would look down, and he would see that all the people were working hard. They were all getting ready for the changing of the seasons. Some people were working on birch bark canoes. Some people were dancing on wild rice. Some people were picking berries. Some people were smoking fish, right? Smoke fish, not drugs. That's what I tell my students. Yes. So this young man, he would stand on this hill, and he would carry the image of his heart's desire here, and he would feel it here. And he would put the bibiguan to his lips, and he would begin to blow. That that sound would float down from the hill that the young man was standing on, and it would go down into his village. And everyone that heard that sound, they stopped what they were doing because no one had ever heard anything like that before. Finally, that sound made its way to the wigwam of the young woman. The wigwam, the traditional home of the Anishinaabe people, Ojibwe people, Chippewa. And as soon as she would hear that sound, she would know instantly that that was for her. She would come out of her wigwam and she would look up onto that hill and she would see this young man standing up there making this unique, beautiful sound. And she always knew who he was, and she always wondered why he would never talk to her. The young woman, she would go up and stand next to him, and she was so amazed and overwhelmed that somebody could express so much emotion without uttering a single word. And as she listened, she realized that the music was intertwining their souls together. When I was a young man, a kid really, and I started to first learn our stories, I had a nokomis, a grandmother, and she would tell me the stories all the time. But back then, when I was a little kid, like most of us, we run all over the place and we're pretty crazy. And we think we know it all. You know, they tell us what to do or try to teach us something, and we're like, yeah, we know. They're like, be careful with that, it's dangerous. Yeah, we know. So my nokomis, you know, she would tell me Bazani Yan so much that I actually thought Bazani Yan was my Indian name. She would say Bazanian, and I'd say, yeah, right here, Nokomis. And she would say, Gawin, no. She would say, Bazanian means be quiet. You're too loud. She said, I have a story to tell you. And this story is about another little kid who thought he knew everything. And this little kid's name was Winnabuju. And it said that Winnabuju is half spirit and half man. And he teaches us how to live, and more oftentimes than not, how not to live. And Winnabuju, one day, he would go through his village and he would see all these adults working really hard. And Winnabuju, he had all these good ideas. So he would go up to them and he would try to tell them his good ideas. But the people would tell him to go away. They would say, Bazanian, you know, you're just a little kid yet. You don't know anything yet. So Winnabuju was frustrated by this. And he would go from village to villager. And he would go up and somebody would be working on a birch bark canoe. And he would go up to him and start to tell them how to do it better. And again, he was met with, Winnabuju, Bazanian, you're just bungi itago, Ojibwe, you're just a little kid. Majan, go away, go play, go be a little kid. And at the time, Winnabuju, he sought out the counsel of his nokomis, his grandmother. And he would find his nokomis out in the woods collecting medicines. And he would go up to his nokomis and he would say, Nokomis, I have a problem. Can you help me with it? And she would say, why, yes, Winnabuju, what is it? How can I help you? And he would begin to tell her about the treatment of the adults in the village, how he had all these really good ideas, but nobody was listening to him, that they all thought he was just a dumb little kid. And she said, well, what are you asking me, Winobuju? He said, Nokomis, I know you're very knowledgeable in medicines. Is there a medicine out there that'll help me get smarter? She goes, oh, Winobuju, you want to be smarter? He said, yes, when I'm the smartest man alive, everyone in the village is going to do what I say because I'll have all the best ideas. And Nokomis, she thought about this for a bit, and then she said, you know what, Winobuju? I think there is a medicine out there for you, but I have to go out and gather it, so you'll have to come back later. So very excited, Winobuju ran out in the woods, and he started to have all these grandiose thoughts about how everybody in his village was going to listen to him and do what he says, because he was going to be Winobuju, the smartest man alive. Finally, he was so excited he couldn't help it anymore. He ran back out into the woods, and he found Nokomis out in the woods again, picking medicines. And he would go up to her and say, Nokomis, did you find the medicine that'll help me get smarter? And she said, why, yes, I did, Winobuju. It's right here. And she would reach into her pouch, and she would pull something out, and she would say, here, Winobuju, eat these. These are smart berries. And at Winobuju, he would look down at what she held in her hand there, and he would make this face. And then he would look back down, and he put his nose down by what she held in her hand, and he would smell it. And he would say, oh, Nokomis. He said, that's rabbit poop. And she goes, oh, Winobuju, see, it's working. You're getting smarter already. My Nokomis, my grandmother, she would actually pull out a cellophane bag full of rabbit poop. And if we weren't listening, if we were talking and doing all this, she would come up to us and dare us to eat it. She would say, here, eat these smart berries. You think you're so smart, you don't have to listen. Here, by then we heard the story, right? And we all smartened up, and we're like, oh, yeah, okay, Nokomis, whatever, Grandma. We're not falling for that one. But many years later, we would find out that the joke would be on us, because really what she was trying to feed us was only chocolate-covered raisins. So just think, when you think that you smartened up enough, the universe throws another curveball your way. I'd like to tell that story first because it's one of the first stories that I remember growing up with. And I would use these stories to help guide me all throughout my life. And when I found my first flute, I would go out in the woods, and I would do just as my grandmother had instructed me. I would be quiet. I would sit down, and I would listen. And I would listen to the way that the wind sounds through the trees. I would listen to how the raindrops sounded on the canopy. I would listen to the streams and these kinds of things. And one day when I was sitting out there listening and working with the flute, I heard something in the woods, some rustling in the leaves. An animal was coming my way. And I knew it was too small to be anything serious, like a mukwa, like a bear. And when I finally did turn and look, I saw that it was an ejitimo, a squirrel. And it was followed by another ejitimo. And pretty soon these ejitimo, they were running up and down the trees, and they were chittering and chattering away. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a great time to try to talk to these animals, just like in the story. So I would try to imitate those squirrels out there, thinking that I would scare them away. But a funny thing happened is they didn't get afraid. They didn't run away. They actually got more curious, and they actually came closer. And I would tell my mother this story too, and she would look at me, kind of like the way Winobuju looked at what was in her hand. And she would look at me like that. She goes, you're just nuts. That's why they listen to you. I tell my own students that, it's good to listen to your parents, your adults, your elders, but there are teachers out there in the woods, and if you're quiet and you listen, you will learn something too. This next song I'm going to share with you is called Ejitimo Waning, which means squirrel tail in the Ojibwe language. And if you listen with your eyes closed, you will actually be able to see those squirrels chasing each other up and down those trees. I would learn again later, that I was actually imitating the squirrel's territorial call, and they were actually just coming to see who this big squirrel was in their territory, yeah. This is called Ejitimo Waning, squirrel tail. As I would learn our stories and our culture, I would also be involved with the public education system. And as you're a young Indigenous person going through that system, you start to learn about that difficult relationship that we had with the U.S. government. And I would learn things like we didn't become U.S. citizens until 1924. I would learn that we didn't have freedom of speech until 1968. And I would learn that we didn't have freedom of religion until 1978. That's only 45 years ago that we've been able to practice our culture and our language and our religion without fear of persecution from the U.S. government. And before 1978, we would have generations and generations of silence where our voices and our opinions didn't matter and were not heard. And it's going to take a while for a people to be able to learn how to use that voice, to be able to effectively communicate some of those generational traumas that we had went through. And through this difficult conversation, we build empathy and compassion. And then we have acknowledgement and then acceptance. And from that point on, we will be able to move forward together to a better future, one that's more inclusive to all of us, because we are all Indigenous from somewhere, and we all have that Indigenous connection to our languages, gifted to us by our spirits and by the Creator. I know for many of you that are our European American relatives, when your people first came here, they were told that they couldn't speak their Dutch, their Finnish, their German heritage anymore, and they had to leave that behind to be integrated into the system. So in a certain way, you know what we have been through as Indigenous folks. So there is that, and there's something to be said about that, because we are all Indigenous from somewhere. As I would get older and become a parent myself, we would talk about what we were going to name our children. And we thought about names that were in English, and then we thought about what we had been through as Indigenous people. We thought about the Indian Removal Order Act of the 1800s, where they wanted to move all Indigenous tribes west across the Mississippi. We thought about the Indian Civilization Act that gave birth to the boarding school era, where children were taken out of their homes, where their hair was cut, their traditional clothing burned, and they were beaten if they spoke their language or practiced their culture. So we thought about these things, and we thought about how we were trying to bring the language back, how we were trying to bring the culture back. And that's when we decided to name our children in the traditional language of our people. Why did I choose the name Indeaki for my daughter, which means my heart of the earth? I wanted the members of my family and my community to hear how beautiful the language sounds. I wanted them to see how proud we were to use the language in such a way. And I had hoped that it would encourage them to do the same. This next song I'm going to share with you is a song for my daughter, and it's a song of unconditional love. And it's a song where at this time we keep all those people that we love unconditional in our minds and in our hearts. Those ones in our family that suffer from illness and disease. Those ones that we love unconditional that suffer from addiction. Those ones that we love who have walked on to the next journey. This song is for them. This is a healing song called Indeaki, my heart of the earth. As I'm learning the stories, I'm learning that we have great respect for our animal relatives. And it says that we learned a lot from our animal relatives. They guided us, they helped us, they made the ultimate sacrifice for us so that we may survive and thrive here on Mother Earth. And as I'm learning these stories, I realize that there's a shape-shifting element to these stories. And it said that Winnebuju is our trickster and our hero, and he shape-shifts a lot to teach us lessons. And really, when Ojibwe people meet each other, sometimes you'll hear them say "Buju" as a greeting. And some people think that's kind of derivative of French. We had 200 years of the fur trade with our French relatives where I'm from. And they'll say that once in a while. It sounds like you're trying to speak French, you know. But really, it's more than just a greeting. It's actually a question. When we go up and we say "Buju," we're actually asking the person, are you Winnebuju? Are you the shapeshifter who has come into my life to teach me a lesson that I need to learn? A lot of the things that he shapeshifts into and teaches us lessons, I thought I wanted to embody that part of the storytelling. So then I would create these masks down here, and I would embody that spirit of that shapeshifting element. So I made this fox, and let me put him on. I made this fox, and I was in a show about a decade ago called Animal Farm. And in this show, I was on the stage and I was tearing apart some chickens. I got into the chicken coop, and they were all fake chickens. They were puppet chickens, you know. They're on people's hands. And there I was tearing them up, and I was on all fours, and I heard screaming from my audience. And when I looked out in my audience, I saw there was two little kids out there, and they were just screaming, and their eyes were wide, and tears were coming down their face. And I was like, they really thought I was really an animal killing these chickens. And so I stood up and I took off my fox and I was like, oh, hey, don't worry about it. It's just me. I'm a human. And then they started to cry. And I felt really bad. I was like, oh, man. And I talked to them. I was like, it's all right. You know, but then part of me was like, yeah, great job. Way to do it. Way to go. You know, there's some other animals that don't like it. The dogs. The dogs really don't like it. They're uneasy about it. Cats really don't like it either, and raccoons as well. I had a raccoon on my porch a couple weeks ago, and he was causing some trouble, right? He's a trickster too, he wears a mask. So there I go out on the porch with this on, and I get down on all fours, and I challenge him, and he goes to the end of the porch, and for him, I think it was fight or flight, right? But this raccoon, he must have thought he was a shapeshifter too, because he jumped off that porch thinking that he was going to shapeshift into a flying squirrel. But gravity had other plans in store for him, and it would bring him down. And I would hear a thump, and I would go over and I would look to see if he's okay, and I would just see his tail disappearing into the woods. This next song I'm going to share with you is kind of like that trickster element. This song is called The Wagoosh, the Fox. You're fine. I'm glad to have some backup there from the dog barking. It is true, though, we do have stories on why the dogs do smell each other's butts. And a long time ago, all the animals used to meet up in groups and gather like we gather now. So like the bear would do that, the wolf would do that, the fox would do that, and even the dog, the animals would do that. And before they would go into their lodge to have a meeting, they would take off their coats, they would take off their furs, and they would hang them up on a pole outside the lodge. And all these dogs from all over the world were sitting in this lodge, and they're all talking about really important dog things like squirrels and cats and that kind of business. And this little bitty dog would be sitting there, and he must have got into something bad because he felt something really, really strong in his stomach. And he felt really, really bad, and it started to bubble and make funny noises. And then he realized something. He's like, oh my God, I have to boog it. I have to fart. And he was sitting there and he was trying to hold it in really bad, and he was getting really antsy, and he was even trying to like sit on his hind leg to like help him. And then he had this really good idea, like, I'm just gonna let a little bit out, all right, just a little bit. So he was sitting there and he kind of like got in the position and he bent over a little bit and he started to let a little bit out, but it turned out to be a great loud noise. That's kind of a sad one. And so all the animals they'd all look at this little dog. How did this big noise come from this little dog? And they would kind of laugh about it. And then they got back to serious dog business. But that boogit would float up to the top of the lodge, and then it would start to come back down. And pretty soon the dogs, their eyes started to sting and water. And then pretty soon they have such strong noses that their noses started to sting and burn too. So they started to put their noses in the dirt and they were clawing at them. And there was chaos everywhere in the lodge. And all they could think about was getting out to get fresh air. And they all started to run into each other, and they all ran out of the lodge. And they all started to grab the coats. And they didn't see which ones they were grabbing. They grabbed whatever one was hanging there and they threw it on and they ran back to the place that they came from. And now today, because the dogs have such strong smells, they smell other dogs for that coat. So when two dogs meet each other, you'll see right away they go and they smell under that tail to see if that's their coat. Yes. Now, usually when I tell that story in schools, the teachers kind of get upset because the kids will walk around all week making fart noises. And so the ones that I go to over and over again, they're like, hey, maybe not tell that one this time, but that's the one the kids want to hear. They like to hear those kinds of things. And there's moral stories within all of our stories too. The story that I told about the smart berries, there's hidden wisdom in there. And what was that story about? Was it about wisdom? Was it about the kid having patience to grow up and let experience teach him? Or was it about knowing better, knowing what's good for us and what's not good for us, and having that wisdom to decide for ourselves? So encoded within each of the stories are different lessons that it's up to us as the individuals to figure out. And that's the beauty of the storytelling, because we hear these stories our whole lives, and at different parts of our life, we can relate to different parts of those stories. I have so many flutes up here to share in so little time. Each flute has its own story and its own voice and its own song. This next flute I'm going to share with you is called the Shapeshifter. One of the reasons I call it that is because when you look at this piece here, it kind of looks like that fish, like that gigu. And then when you look at this piece up here, this is kind of like, it reminds me of that cloud that's always changing. Some days it's an eagle, some days it's a horse. And when I hold it up this way, it kind of looks like the cuckoo, the Ojibwe word for owl. This next song I'm going to share with you is called The Shapeshifter. took inspiration for that song from Wayne's World. Anybody know what that is, Wayne's World? He's like, when he's changing. So that's what I was kind of trying to imitate. I'm going to switch up headgears here again. Going to move on to the wolf, the Maingan. Now the wolves and the animals for the indigenous people, we have close connections and close relationships to them. In the 7 grandfather teachings, there's an animal to represent each of the 7 grandfather teachings. And standing where the wolf stands is in the place of humility. And it says that the wolf has taught us how to be a family together, how to treat each other. And it said that the wolf has taught us how to hunt together as a group. So we hold all those animals in high esteem. It said that when the Creator first made the world, and he placed all the plants where they needed to go and everything where it needed to go, that he would place original man down upon the earth. And he would task original man with walking the earth and naming all the creation. And as he did this, he would see that the animals came in 2 pairs, yet he was all alone. So he would go before the Creator and he would ask the Creator, how come everything comes in 2s, yet I am all alone? And the Creator responded with, I will send somebody to walk, talk, and play with you. So he would send to him the Maingan, and he would ask him, what would you have me do with this Maingan? And he would task them both to walk through creation and name everything in creation. And as the 2 would do this, they would become bonded like brothers. And at the end of their journey, after they named everything in creation, they would go again before the Creator, and they would ask the Creator, now what will you have of us now that our task is complete? And the Creator would respond with, well, now you must go your separate ways, because the people who are coming will not understand that bond that you guys have, and they will fear you, and they will hunt you. So from that point on, Maingan and original man had went their separate ways. And this next song that I'm going to share with you, I learned back home where I'm from on the reservation. It's actually a wolf sanctuary, and there's a place there called the Echo Valley. And in Echo Valley, there's the Echo Valley Wolf Pack. And I would go there for a couple weeks and listen to them call back and forth, and then I would try to imitate them as I do with all my flutes, because I can't read music. So I just kind of listen to my environment, and those become my songs. This next song I'm going to share with you is all about that relationship between the original man and the Maingan, and how they felt when they had split apart, and how those wolf calls echoing back and forth are like them longing to be back as brothers again. Since we're on the subject of flute, that was my timer going off because I like to talk, and I talk too much. My grandmother, like I said, she would always say "bazanian" to me, meaning be quiet. So I took that as my Indian name, right. Well, actually, my spirit name, Ojibwe name, is Bapewa Gush, which means laughing fox in our language. And I would receive this name at a young age, at 13, as I would want to go out and partake in this ritual called fasting, the vision quest. So I would go and talk to a man who knew the ceremonies, and he would say to me, "Do you have an Indian name, a spirit name?" And I would say, "No, I don't." He would say, "Well, you need to have one so that when you're out there in the woods, the spirits will recognize who you are." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I went to a man who knew the naming ceremony, and I would offer him gifts and tobacco. And he would take those gifts and tobacco, and he would do whatever the medicine people do. And many months later, he would get a hold of me and say, "I have a name from you, from the spirits." And we would do a naming ceremony, and we would invite the community and my family. And that's where I was gifted the name Bapewa Gush, meaning laughing fox. And then later on that spring, I would find myself in the woods fasting, connecting to that spiritual world around me. A long time ago, babies were named as soon as they were born. They were given that spirit name. It's almost like a baptism. They get that spirit name, and that guides them and protects them their whole life. But because our culture and our law and our ways were outlawed, we couldn't partake in that practice. So my grandmother didn't have her name. My mother didn't get her name until she was 50. I didn't get my name until I was 13. But my children, they had their names when they were born. So in the name of reclaiming that which we have lost, we are taking back some of that stuff. This next flute, maybe I'll share with you this last one here, maybe. This flute is a double flute. And I always tell my students that, in the teaching of wisdom stands the beaver. And it said that the beaver stands in that place because he'll create an environment that all others benefit off of. When he builds that dam, he creates almost an estuary, and all animals will come in and partake in that. And it says that the wisdom, too, when we talk about wisdom, we have to have the wisdom to see the gifts that other people bring into our communities and into our lives. But we also have to have the wisdom to understand and recognize those gifts that we have in ourselves, in those ways, positive ways that we contribute back to our families and back to our communities. This song is a song for that coming together. We will see these two flutes sounding beautiful individually, but when they come together and they work together, they create something harmonious and wonderful and beautiful. Miigwech, everybody. I'd like to thank you for hanging out with me today and listening to some culture, some stories, and some flute music. I hope you found this afternoon's demonstration educational as well as entertaining. Miigwech. If you have any questions about the flutes, please come on up, take a look, take some pictures. If you want to check out Baby Yoda here. I always forget to add him to what I'm doing because I start to storytell, and there's so much up here. It just what comes out, you know. But again, Miigwech, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.